and welcome to the Haddonfield United Methodist Church Weekly Sermon Podcast. For more information about us or anything you hear in this episode, be sure to visit haddonfieldumc.org. We hope that this and every episode can help sustain you on the journey as together we seek to put our faith into action.
Hi friends, welcome to the Sermon Podcast this week. It is the weekend of July 20th, and I will be sharing a message on the Gospel of Luke chapter 10, verses 38 to 42. Now as they went on their way, he entered a certain village where a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. She had a sister named Mary who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to what he was saying. But Martha was distracted by her many tasks. So she came to him and asked, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her then to help me." But the Lord answered her, "Martha, Martha, you are worried and distracted by many things. There is need of only one thing. Mary has chosen the better part, which will not be taken from her." What would you consider to be one of the greatest threats to our society? This is a question that can create a ball in the stomach, can cause anxiety and worry. There seem to be many threats to our society, to our security, to our safety, to our health, to our democracy, and depending on people's positions and ideologies, we may disagree. When I was growing up, of course, my parents were constantly trying to mediate and to mitigate threats to us kids. I have two siblings, and of course, things that threatened the wellness and well-being of kids when I was growing up was alcohol use, drug use, crime, other things. Today, I'm realizing as a parent that there is a more silent threat to our society, and particularly I'm seeing it among young people and my own children, people of all ages really. And it is an unexpected threat, something that's causing massive damage to the fabric of our society, to relationships, to people's mental health, and to really the way that we interact with one another. I never expected it, and I don't think anybody did. It's devices. Phones, iPads, computers, TVs, virtual reality. Of course, I love my devices. I do everything on my devices. It's how I consume my news. It's how I write my sermons. It's how I do emails and messaging, stay in communication with people. It's how I engage in the world with social media. But the more and more devices become a part of our lives, the more scientists, mental health professionals, and others are warning us against the dangers that they pose to our own well-being. Just a search on Google, engaging its AI tool, about the effect of scrolling on the brain yields this result. Excessive scrolling, particularly doom scrolling, and mindless social media consumption can negatively affect the brain. It can lead to reduced attention spans, diminished critical thinking, emotional fatigue, and even symptoms of depression and anxiety. The constant stimulation and reward cycle of scrolling can also rewire the brain's reward system, making it harder to focus on other tasks and contributing to feelings of anxiety and fatigue. Did you hear some danger zones in there? Anxiety, fatigue, depression, reduced attention spans, diminished critical thinking. These can affect relationships, how we interact with one another, how we interact with the world, the sharpness of our minds. I really experienced this recently when a good friend from my growing up, he and his wife and kids were in New York City, and my wife and kids and I traveled up to meet with them and have dinner around Times Square. And I thought, oh, my kids love his kids. They're about the same age, and they've only been with each other a few times in their lives, but it'll be a great time. And as we sat there in the restaurant catching up, I looked over and all four girls were doing this. There were no words in between them. There was no relationship, nothing happening, but they were all four zeroed in on a piece of metal and glass and electronics. And I realize I see the same thing now at Thanksgiving dinners, at other family gatherings, people of all ages. The more we're engaging with devices, we see that it's creating addictive behaviors that I mentioned here in this article. Diminished critical thinking that is lifted up. Constant exposure to surface level information can erode the ability to analyze and reflect on information deeply. When we just skim things and learn the most basic things and then move on, we can think less deeply about things and really not learn or engage at a deep level. Emotional fatigue, excessive exposure to negative news or distressing content can lead to increased stress, anxiety, and even feelings of depression, constantly paying attention to the craziness of the world and what's happening at a 24-hour cycle, not just the 6 o'clock news or the evening news, but every moment of every day. It can not only create depression, but also compassion fatigue, so that when there's a real issue that requires our presence and compassion, we may find that we simply don't have the resources emotionally or physically to engage with people. Also, brain rot, prolonged exposure to low-quality digital content can lead to mental fatigue, decreased memory retention, and difficulty concentrating. Rewiring of the reward system. This is where the addictive behavior comes in that I myself have struggled with. The constant release of dopamine from social media interactions can create an addictive cycle, making it difficult to engage from scrolling. I don't know if you've had the experience where you just constantly scroll either short videos or news articles, and before you know it, you've sat somewhere for an hour. And how often do we say, well, I don't have time. I'm so busy. But how many hours do we spend in these sort of addictive behaviors? This is more than just a surface level issue. The Mayo Clinic has an article called Doom Scrolling, Stop the Scroll, Protect Your Mental Health. This is coming out of, again, the Mayo Clinic in Ohio. When you think of the word doom, it has an evocative emotional response, but that lines up with the term doom scrolling, right? Why do we doom scroll? Which means we just constantly move from one bad news thing to the next. Often it starts with a goal of becoming more aware of a situation so that we can understand what's happening and prepare ourselves for it. However, with doom scrolling, the search for answers becomes obsessive and unproductive. Rather than helping us to learn useful information, we end up wasting time to surf from one outrageous story to another. And so the Mayo Clinic article also outlines similar effects that it creates within us: sleep procrastination, worsened social health, and decreased exercise. So we can doom scroll late at night, which makes people stay up later, which makes them more fatigued, less effective at work, and less present with other people. Worsened social health. Time spent with friends is restorative. However, when, like at that restaurant with my kids and my friends' kids, when we are caught in doom scrolling or engaging in our devices, we spend less time actually interacting with people. And the last thing here is decreased exercise. The more time we spend on our devices, the less time we spend outside or exercising. Now, I don't know if my going through this information has validated your experience or helped you to say, yeah, my kids are like that, or my grandkids are like that, or maybe you say, oh, he's talking about me, and you feel bad or anxious. I want to talk about the difference between busyness and worry and contemplative presence. The text that was read today that I shared from Luke is this beautiful and powerful story of two sisters. Now, the Gospel of Luke does a lot with travel and hospitality. Jesus travels a lot in Luke, and he moves from town to town, and we see how important hospitality is. Jesus sends people into foreign towns and says, don't take anything. They have to rely on other people to give them food and drink and lodging. And we see that Jesus lectures other people when they don't offer this ancient Middle Eastern hospitality, which is to have a great virtue. It's similar to ancient Greek hospitality, which kind of separates refined cultures from those that are unrefined and that are lower in substance. And so here, Jesus visits these two friends, which we know from other texts are the sisters of Lazarus, and hospitality is being offered, particularly by Martha. And Martha, it says, is welcoming them into her home, and she is distracted by many tasks, meaning she's probably running around making sure that they have food and drink and cushion, and she's doing what culture tells her she should do. She is doing the work, the tasks of hospitality. However, she finally comes up to Jesus and says, Jesus, I'm so sorry to bother, but can you see my sister is just being lazy here? She's hanging out with you and the other guys. Can you tell her to help me because I'm running myself ragged? And Jesus says to her, Martha, Martha. He tries to get her attention at a deep level. He repeats her name, Martha, Martha, you are worried and distracted by many things. Now, do you know why I'm thinking about devices? The worries and distractions of our lives. We are worried and distracted by many things. Whoever you are and wherever you are, I know today, because we are living in this society, in this moment, you are worried and distracted by many things. I am worried and distracted by many things. But Jesus says, there is need of only one thing, and Mary has chosen the better part. Well, let's talk about Mary. It says that she is reclining or sitting at the feet of Jesus. I imagine Jesus would be sitting crisscross applesauce on a cushion on the floor, and people may sit around him. And so she's literally before him as his legs are crossed and sitting near his feet. She's in a position to listen and to be in communal fellowship. Now, in that culture, she is sitting in the place of a man. So in some ways, she's violating the customary practices of patriarchy, which means the women stay separate, they serve the men. And here, Martha's perhaps trying to tap into that, pointing out the fact that her sister is breaking cultural norms. But Jesus says, he creates this inclusive space where he says there's only one needed thing. Now, I want to talk about what that needed thing or necessary thing is that Jesus says she has chosen the better part. We can look in this passage. I've heard so many sermons and interpretations of this passage. It gets broken down to the dichotomy of being versus doing. The one is doing, the one is being. The doing is bad, the being is good, right? Martha is doing, she's chosen the lesser part. Mary is being, and she's doing the better part. I think there's maybe a deeper way to understand and analyze this, because that's a false dichotomy. God, of course, calls us to do, calls us to offer hospitality. God calls us to serve. I think the problem here is not the doing. The problem is what Jesus says to her. He says, you are worried and distracted. You are worried and distracted. But Mary has chosen the better part. And the better part that she has chosen is to be rooted, to be present, and to be relational. She is rooted, literally sitting still and listening to Jesus. She's rooting herself in the presence of Jesus. She is being present in the moment, not running around, and she has this great gift of Jesus the Master in her house, and so she is experiencing that. She's being present, and she's being relational. By being present to Jesus, she is creating and deepening a relationship. By the way, this Mary is likely one of the cast of characters who is at the cross with Jesus at the end of his story and at the tomb on the day of resurrection. There are multiple Marys that get named, including Mary of Magdala and Jesus' mother. So the relationship is born in her being rooted, present, and relational. So today, what does it look for us to be rooted? I know one of my temptations when I wake up, the moment my eyes open, I reach for my phone and I look at the news, or I look to see if I have any messages first thing in the morning. And while that's a very powerful temptation, one of the things I've been trying to do, and in this new season, this summer season, I'm trying to break that habit and instead root myself in spiritual practices before I begin the practice of doom scrolling. There is a desire in my heart and in my life to say what's going on in the world so I can be prepared for what's going to hit me when I leave the door. But really what scientists and researchers and psychologists tell us is that it actually does not have the desired effect. It only creates a sense of anxiety and fatigue, not of readiness and an increased ability to handle problems. It's actually decreased ability to handle problems. And so what is more important is our ability to be rooted in Jesus. And so think about spiritual practices. Of course, one of the antidotes in our society is coming also through the back door of spiritual practices that come from the Eastern world, particularly through Buddhism and Hinduism. And these are practices of yoga and mindfulness and other sort of spiritual practices. But they're ancient Christian practices as well, and ancient Jewish practices of meditation, of prayer, and of presence. And so one of the things I am starting to do is that for my recent graduation, someone gave me this beautiful book, Whom Shall I Fear? 366 Scriptures for Following Christ and Facing Persecution. And the idea for this, it's 366 different days, which is, one for every day of the year plus one. And it's rooted in the story of Pastor Richard Wormbrandt, who was abducted by Romanian secret police while walking to the church on February 29th in 1948. That's why there's 366, by the way. It's a leap year. But anyway, he was arrested by Romanian police and he was imprisoned for many years because of his Christian beliefs under communism and communist rule. And while he was there, he came to understand that there are 366 different scriptures in the Bible that basically say, don't worry, don't be afraid. And so he began to work his way through these scriptures and to find these scriptures. And the person who put this book together has compiled 366 different scriptures that basically point to the idea of do not be afraid. So rooting ourselves in something like this, every day I'm seeking to start my day and just reading one of those scriptures and rooting myself in a few minutes of prayer and meditation, like Mary was rooted at the feet of Jesus. The second thing is that she was present. What does it mean to be, of course, present in the moment? Perhaps you have practiced mindfulness, breath techniques, yoga, Tai Chi, things like that. But there's a different kind of presence that I am experiencing in ministry and in life is decreased, and that is the presence to other people. I'm noticing that especially among young people, eye contact is not much of a thing. People have a really hard time making eye contact because I think we're really used to not doing that. In his book, Touch, by Pastor Rudy Rasmus, a pastor out of Houston, Texas, he talks about his Aunt May and what he learned from her. She used to run a corner store. And he says, love before leaving someone's presence. This is a lesson he learned from Aunt May. Every person who walked in the door of the grocery store was treated as though he or she was the only human being on earth. Auntie May looked into people's eyes. She asked questions and she remembered previous conversations. You see, each conversation wasn't about her. It was about them. Have you ever been with someone who looks you in the eye and makes you feel like the only person in the room? Practices of being present to other people. Ask questions. Look someone in the eye. Make sure you're present with them. I believe that is the connection that happened between Mary and Jesus and other people in the room, that Jesus says Mary has chosen the better part. She was rooted, she was present, and she was relational. You know, how we maintain relationships through devices can be shallow. It can protect us from real engagements and from actually going deeper with people. But what our faith calls us to is relationships, because that's where love is transmitted, where it's shared, given, and where it's also received. And so Jesus wasn't upset that Martha was doing, but he said that she was afraid and she was worried and distracted because she was not being relational. She didn't know what people were saying. She wasn't actually spending time. She was getting them water, but she was not asking them about their life or their family. And so today, as we wrap up this message on this story, I want you to think about your own life, your own worries and distractions. How might you take steps this summer to be rooted in the love of God at the feet of Jesus, some sort of spiritual or contemplative practice? How might you be more present in each moment when someone is in the room? Look at them, make eye contact, make conversation. And third, how can we prioritize people over productivity? How can we prioritize our relationships with people rather than getting done what we think needs to get done? As we seek to do this together, as we follow Jesus, may we be the church in a hurting world. Amen.
Thanks again for listening. For more information about us or anything you heard in this episode, be sure to visit haddonfieldumc.org. Through today's scripture and message, we pray that you find strength to go deeper into love of God and neighbor as we work together to be the church in a hurting world.